Welcome to today's session. Today we are talking about full focus, and I'm going to be sharing some practical strategies to help you to focus more during your day-to-day work, and then also some ideas for longer term development. I want to start with explaining why focus is so important. My whole business is based on helping people create a better workday. And what I mean by that, really simply, is a day where you can go to work and you look forward to your work because of the work you do and the people that you work with. It's a day you can get the job done, which sounds way easier than it is most of the time. And finally, it's a day where we can switch off at the end and enjoy whatever else you have happening in your life. And quite often we focus on the time piece first. And what I mean by that is I need to plan my day better. I need to manage my time better. I need to, use all these different techniques to make sure I'm not wasting a minute. But you could have all the time organized in the world. And if you don't have the energy to do the work, you're just going to be spinning your wheels. And I'm sure there's definitely people here today who have had a really organized day ahead, but they're just mentally or physically drained, and so you just don't get the work done even though you could. And the third element of it is you could have all the time in the world organized, you could be really energized, but then your attention could be completely fragmented. And what I mean by that is you could either be focusing on the wrong things, or your focus could be just being pulled in all different directions, and so again we don't get our work done. So that's why today's session, we're going to focus on the attention piece, on making sure you can build your focus, and that will support everything else. So what I want to say to you is, there is benefits of having focus and flow in the workday. And when we talk about flow, people say it's being totally immersed or absorbed in a task. Now, if anyone here plays sport, plays music, enjoys to garden or cook, you know what flow feels like. That's when you are just in it, you're enjoying the work and you don't even feel the time passing, and it doesn't even feel like work. It doesn't even feel like a challenge. And there's that underlying sense of motivation that you're just enjoying what you're doing. Now, in the workplace, we don't get the opportunity to have so much flow in our day. And that's just the nature of a lot of our jobs. There's meetings that are coming in and out. There's multiple tasks you have to do. There's people popping by asking you questions. And so it's very unrealistic for any of us, I think, to get, a 3-hour uninterrupted break of work. But what we would like to do is to get more of that flow feeling during the day, and to be able to feel like when we're working on something, we are fully absorbed in it, that we are enjoying the process, even when it's not always as easy as we'd like, and that we have that lovely intrinsic sense of motivation. And that all sounds like it would be really, really nice to have in the workday. But the problem is most people don't feel any flow at all during the workday. And it's for a number of different factors, and the two biggest ones are stress and multitasking. Okay, so if we're stressed, it means that we're not able to focus on anything for more than a couple of moments. Our minds are elsewhere, our body is in heightened awareness, and so we can't get into the flow. The other one is multitasking, and what that means is you're trying to do too many things at once. I always say you've only one set of hands, and I don't know if there's anyone here this morning that can type two different things at the same time. So even though we like to think that we're multitaskers, what we're really doing is switching between things really, really fast. And then the distractions and the interruptions, they increase all of that. And that way is why it feels sometimes like we're just hopping from one thing to the next and never getting to finish anything and never really getting into that lovely flow state. And then finally, when it comes to distractions and interruptions, it's not the topic for today, but I did want to highlight that even the presence of our devices, like our mobile phones, can make us feel like we need to look at it, like we feel we need to check it, and that also impacts our attention. So while that isn't the topic for today, I did want to pop it in there and say, if you tune out for the rest of this webinar, for the next 50 minutes, if you go off and do something else, one thing you could do straight away is decide that you're going to put your phone out of sight for even 30 minutes today, and you'll benefit. So if you have to go do something else, you're already winning if you decide to do that. But I do hope that you stay with me and I get to share maybe a few more ideas with you. Because the thing is, when it comes to attention, the average duration that we spend on a screen and I know most of us are desk-based, has been declining over the years. So get this now. In 2004, people averaged around 150 seconds or just over 2.5 minutes on a computer screen before switching to something else, okay? And what I mean by this is before switching tabs or switching applications or switching to go to another task, okay? Then in 2012, that dropped down to 75 seconds, right? Just over a minute. And for the last, I think since 2016, and it remains pretty stable since, the average amount of time on any screen before switching is between 44 and 50 seconds. That means that we can't even stay focused on the same task or the same screen for a minute before we're pulled away on average. And now I know you'll be saying, Niamh, that's not true. You know, just yesterday I spent a half an hour on something, and I hope you did, because of course we're looking at the averages here. But this decline just shows us how fragmented our focus and our attention is. Before we go any further, I want to say to you at this point, it's not your fault. Okay, so this isn't going to be a session on you must change this, 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 and this, and it's all down to your personal responsibility. Because, and I'll talk about this a bit later, we live in a work and a social environment that drives this kind of behaviour. Okay, so it's not all down to us. There are bigger factors at play. But I love to focus on what's in our control. And so with that in mind, give yourself a bit of grace, okay? We are all doing our best, and knowing that we can do a little bit better. And I want to start by explaining for you the difference between distractions and interruptions, because they are a little bit different, and understanding these nuances is the first step in being able to regain your focus. So distractions are when you pull yourself away from your work, and interruptions are when other people pull you away from work. And what's interesting is most people I speak to initially, when I say what's getting in the way of your work day, it's interruptions. And they're saying, oh, you know, all these things are interrupting me and I can't get a thing done. But when we have a conversation, even for a couple of moments, we find it's not actually the interruptions, it's you being distracted. And so when we know it's us, that means that we have more control over it, which is great. And in a moment, I'm going to share the 3 different types of distractions, and you might find that there's one of those buckets that really resonates with you, that you fall into more often than anything else. But like everything, before we get into the idea of trying to manage or reduce them, it's important to understand why they are there. So not all distractions and interruptions are bad. So before we try to eliminate them completely, let's understand why they are here. Distractions, that is your mind mentally alerting you to something that you might need to pay attention to, very, very simply. So way back when, you know, if there was a rustle in a bush, or if there was unexpected footsteps or a strange sound, you would be distracted from what you're doing to pay attention to that. And then you would decide whether or not that distraction needs your focus now, or if you should continue what you're doing. Okay. So we have evolved a lot since, you know, we were reliant on those primitive brains, but it's still important. So if you're being distracted constantly by a certain thought or by a certain feeling, it's important to stop and ask yourself, should I pay attention to this? Is this something that I need to tend to? And the same goes with interruptions. While I know loads of us would love to say, I'd love a day or even half a day without a single interruption, let me remind you that interruptions are the way we communicate in nearly every situation. It's how we ask for help. It's how we share good news spontaneously. It's how we share any worries spontaneously. It's how we stay connected. And a day, a week, a month without interruptions would be very, very lonely. And also there wouldn't be much help flowing between each other. So, you know, they're not all bad, but what we want to do is manage them so they don't completely overtake your working day. With that in mind, I'd like you to take a moment and just consider which type of distraction is impacting you most during your day, okay? So most people think of the digital ones. And what I mean by that is the phone, which I mentioned at the top of the session, but also email notifications, MS Teams pings or Slack pings. It could be multiple windows open, multiple tabs open on your screen, so you're getting distracted thinking which one I need to do. It could be 1,001 things on your desktop. I'm sure there's two types of people here. One type of people has got nothing on their desktop and the other type, it just looks like a mosaic. Okay, so they're all digital distractions and most people think that that's it. Okay, but there are also other kinds of distractions in your environment. So there are physical distractions, and what I mean by that is if the rubbish bin is being collected outside, and if there's roadworks happening, if there's a noisy team down the hall when you're in the office, if the aircon is blowing and it's just too cold, if your back is at you because you forgot to get the footrest, those things, they can pull you away quite regularly during the day, regardless of what's pinging on your devices, okay? And the third is the mental one. And what I mean by this is quite often we're distracted by our own thoughts. You know, you're working on one thing, but something else keeps on coming into your mind. And look, honestly, sometimes it's got nothing to do with work. We all have our own lives outside of work, and there's plenty of things that could be going on any given day that would distract us from the work day. But also, if we don't have a clear handle on our workload, we'll be getting distracted by other things. You know, the ongoing internal chatter. Oh, should I do this next? Should I do this next? Should I be focusing on this? Okay, so just pop a note into the chat if one of these type of distractions resonate most with you and if it's different to what you expected. Because even taking the time today to put this time in your calendar to attend it and to pay attention to this, being aware of the distraction is going to really help you in the workday because you go, oh, I see that now. Okay, I see that now. And that's the first step. We have to be aware. Now, when you understand that, we can start to look at how to improve your focus. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at improving our focus today. So literally, as after you log off from the session, is there something that you can do? And then we're also going to look at some longer term strategies as well, because not everything can be solved in 40 minutes. Okay. And the first thing I would say to you is to take a moment every morning at the start of your workday and ask yourself, what do I need to pay attention to today? So just take 20 seconds. Not even a full minute, okay? And just pause and ask yourself, what do I need to pay attention to today? And so sometimes it'll be a particular person. Sometimes it'll be a particular situation that's unfolding. Sometimes it's a particular task. And if that's too much for you, if you're like, Niamh, I need to pay attention to 101 things today, you could refine that further and say, well, if I do nothing else today, I will. And you pick just one thing. All right. But by doing this at the start of the day, we're priming ourselves to focus on what's most important in that time. And I'll be honest with you, the rate at which we work today is much faster than in previous decades. Thanks to things like automation, AI, and other technologies, we are able to get way more done than in, say, the 80s and the 90s. In fact, you know, what we get done in the morning used to take people a week in the past. All right. So there's nothing stopping you from asking yourself this question after every main break. Ask it first thing in the morning, ask it after a coffee break, ask it in the afternoon once more, and give yourself the opportunity to reset multiple times during the day. There's nothing wrong with having a bad start and then getting back on track. So perhaps one thing you'll do is take a screenshot of this. If you like, feel free to take a screenshot of any of the slides and decide that every morning you're going to look at that screenshot, maybe keep it as your desktop and ask yourself, what do I need to pay attention to? And make that decision. The second thing you can start doing is to start practicing flow. And what I mean by this is when we try to get into flow, a lot of people would wish that it came easily. It doesn't come easily. I mean, I was preparing for this session and this is probably one of my favorite topics. I sat down to refresh the slides and to make sure I covered as much as I could for you. And within 3 minutes, I was just being dragged elsewhere. I was being dragged straight to the kettle for a cup of tea, if I'm honest, right? And then I was being dragged straight to something else. I had no motivation to do it. So we all struggle, okay, with that focus sometimes. But the idea is to practice pushing past that struggle and allowing yourself to release from those interruptions, from that, I suppose, a little bit of a hyper state, from that multitasking state. And once you allow yourself to do that, you will get into flow. So it takes more than a second to get into a rhythm. And I'm sure everyone here who's joined can relate to this, that, you know, you start off with something and you might be a little bit all over the place. You might be thinking about a couple of different things, but if you just push through it, kind of reach a barrier, or you reach a release state, and then you settle into your flow. Okay. And I'm here just to remind you that that's totally normal. In fact, that's the way it's supposed to work. And then once you have done a task, whether maybe it's a 15-minute job, a 30-minute job, a 60-minute job, depending on the type of work you do and the intensity of the work that you do, there's recovery. And what I mean by that is you can't stay in a focused state all day long. You have to recover to be able to do it again. And so that's where breaks and micro breaks come in. And I'll talk to you about that again more later on. So perhaps one thing you'll do after today is recognize that it's a cycle. It's not immediate. It's not always natural, but trusting the process of maybe keeping at it for 1 more minute or 2 more minutes to allow yourself get into that state. Now, coming back to the idea that a lot of us, and I can see it in the chat, you know, get distracted by our mental stuff. It's not necessarily, you know, what's happening on the screen or notifications. It's important to understand how we can keep ourselves on track. So what I would say to you is, if you are being distracted or interrupted by your own thoughts, jot it down. I have a post-it pad next to my keyboard, and whenever I get ideas, I just write it down. And when you write it down, you let your brain know, I've got this. I've got this, and I can come back to focus on it again later. But another thing that you can do is you can write down what you're working on as you go along. Okay, so literally, you know, you're opening up a task and you just jot down, it doesn't have to be your best handwriting, what you're doing. And the reason I suggest you do that, if you find it hard to focus, is that we get interrupted all the time. All right. And I put up the picture of the washing machine because, you know, a washing machine cycle is 60 minutes, maybe for a daily wash, but it could take all day for you to get the washing done. By the time you get around to putting it on, and then maybe you get distracted before you turn it on, and then maybe, I don't know, there's an error code and you have to clear it, and then it takes another while for you to get back to the washing machine to take the washing out of the machine, and that could be a whole day, let's be honest. So even though the cycle time is 60 minutes, the time to complete the wash could be much longer because life gets in the way, and it's the same in work. A task might technically only take you 20 minutes or 60 minutes, but it could end up taking you all day long if you keep getting distracted and interrupted. In fact, it takes people about 25 minutes to come back to work after they're interrupted, and 25% of the time you don't come back to it the same day. So when you write it down, when you write down what you're doing as you're doing it, what happens is after the interruption, you're more likely to go back to the task because you're more aware of it. You're pulled back to what you're doing. And so what we're doing here is, we're not saying that distractions can be completely eliminated. It's not saying we can avoid all interruptions. What we're saying is we can put a few tools in place so that when we're interrupted or when we're distracted, we can come back to the task more quickly. And what that means is you're more likely to get work finished. So instead of starting the day with a to-do list with 5 things on it and finishing with 10 things on it, because you didn't get enough work finished, you're actually shortening that list. And you know, it's always really good at this point to even just take a 10-second reset. Okay. And what I mean by that is just take 10 seconds whenever you're feeling distracted and ask yourself, what was I working on? Just give yourself a beat, give yourself a pause, give yourself a moment before you go into autopilot and just open up the next tab that's there, or you just go to the phone because it's looking at you, or you just go to the notification. Give yourself 10 seconds and just say, what was I working on? And again, these strategies, they bring you back to what you're doing, so that if you're concerned about your workload, if you feel like you're not getting stuff finished, you're more likely to go back to the same task and actually get it done. Now, of course, there are plenty of other ways that we can boost our focus, and really focusing on our energy is the next thing I want to talk about. So if you remember, I spoke about a better workday or a productive workday needing time, energy, and attention. And so one of the reasons we get really distracted is, quite honestly, we're tired, we're stressed, we're a little bit run down, okay? So it's really, really important to pay attention to your energy if you want to focus better. And, these suggestions are based on thousands of inputs from my in-person workshops over the years. So I get people to, write down what their ideas are on the flip chart, and this is what comes up. And time again, it's listening to a great song. Okay. So what I'd like you to do if you're on the chat is to maybe write down in the chat to inspire people what would be a great song that you could put on to get yourself back in the zone, back focused, back in the mood for work if you need to do it. And so honestly, listening to a great song, it's been proven music moves your mind. All right. So maybe it's time to, pop in the AirPods for one or two songs and pop them on. And just a side note on that, if you really struggle with focus, what I suggest some people do is to practice with a playlist. What I mean by that is start off saying, look, I'm just going to work on this task for one song. And then you might say, I'm going to work on this task for 3 songs. And then what you could do is you could actually open up an album or open up a playlist that's 40 minutes long, press play on it and try and work through the whole playlist and let the music carry you. So that's a bit of an alternative strategy, but it works really, really well. Other things that come up are laughter. So just releasing the stress, releasing the worry, releasing what's going on, and just having a good laugh can really, really help during the workday, as well as getting out and moving. I always say move your body to move your mind, getting fresh air and drinking a glass of water. Now, what's interesting about the glass of water as well is there's a dual benefit to that. So not only are you going to focus better if you're more hydrated, so studies have shown obviously to be well hydrated in order to be able to perform at our best, but also you'll have to take more bathroom breaks, which means you're more likely to get up from your desk and move and take a break away from the screen. So hydration wins on so many levels. So here are some ways that, if you're feeling lethargic during the day, you could pick any of these or all of these and decide how you can build that in. And if you're a leader, if you're a manager, if you run meetings, look to see, is there any way you can build that laughter into any team sessions that you have? Make your weekly stand-up a little bit more lively, get that project meeting a little bit more entertaining. Do what you can to lift the mood because everyone benefits, okay? I'm a big believer that fun makes even the hardest work days a lot more easier. So that's all things that literally you can do today to improve your focus. But I want to also talk about medium to long-term strategies because this is something which is built over time. Just like our attention spans have been declining over the years, we could also look to build them up over the next couple of months and year to feel that we're more in control of our focus, okay? Whether that's focusing on a single task or taking a wider focus at a project or a more strategic piece, whatever it might be, all right? And so I do want to talk about some long-term strategies that you can follow. I need to start with the most important one, which is breaks. I don't want you to tell me how many of you are really good at taking breaks, because usually when I ask this question, everyone puts their hand up at the start until I ask, do you take them at your desk? Do you skip them sometimes? Do you shorten them, especially when you're working from home? And all of a sudden, everyone's hand lowers, and we all could do with improving the way we take our breaks. The importance of breaks is that if you don't take them, you won't be able to focus. It's that simple. You won't have the energy. You can't sustain your attention all day long. And the more you're interrupted and the more you're distracted, the more your attention drops. So if you're in a highly responsive or reactive environment where interruptions are part of the job, you need to be more aware of this if you then need to focus on something for a sustained period of time. And so we bring up the 4 breaks, which are very, very important. We start with the micro break. This is 5 to 10 minutes, and studies have shown that even taking that will allow you to return to work with more focus. And it doesn't even have to be a break from work per se. Let's say you're working on a really challenging task for the last hour and you're finding that your mind is drifting, but you have a lot to do. You could switch to a lower intensity task, kind of more boring task. And that's classed as a micro break from the big work. But of course, I'm a big advocate of just getting up and going getting a glass of water, cup of tea, cup of coffee, and taking a few micro breaks during the day. And again, if you're running meetings, instead of having a speedy meeting, what you could do is you could just have your meeting for the normal length of time and cut it 5 minutes short and everyone take a collective break, which we used to do a lot more, but it's less prevalent now in hybrid environments. The next thing you want to focus on is your main break. So please, everyone who's here and everyone who's watching this back, just do me a favor, schedule your lunch as a recurring calendar event. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you're doing it already. I want it in at the same time every day, Monday to Friday for 30 minutes or 1 hour, whatever it is that you take, and just have it there. Because we've found, and I found this time and time again, in environments where you have to clock in and clock out, when I was younger, I used to work in retail, I had to clock in, I had to clock out. We always took our breaks because not only were we not paid, on the break, but also we did this tag team. So if I didn't take it, I'd have to let the other person go, which means I got no break. As soon as we get autonomy over our day, a bit of freedom on our schedule, honestly, the first thing to go is the break. The first thing to go is the break. But if you put it back in, you're doing two things. Number one, you are communicating to yourself that this is the time I'm going to take my break. So you're going to have to get a bit more organized. And then you're also setting boundaries with other people. And it's rare that if someone wants to meet you and you say, that's my lunchtime, that they say, I want you to skip your lunch and meet with me. Unless there's no other time they can meet, it's very, very important. And we have an exception. But most of the time, if you say, that's my lunch break, the other person thinks, oh, yeah, probably I should take my lunch that time too. So not only are you taking your break, you're being a positive role model for the people you work with. So it's win, win, win. Please schedule your breaks. Number 3 for me is very important. It's become more important over the last number of years. I call it the me break. I am sure there are people on this call that have commitments outside of work. What I mean by that is you might have young children, medium children, old children. You might have parents that you're caring for. You might have health issues that you're managing. You might be very involved in the community. You might be very involved in charity. You might be very involved in a hobby or a sport that is very important to you. Okay, we all have stuff going on. And what we find is, especially these days, life is full. Okay, so not only is the workday very, very busy, but then everything outside of work is also very, very busy. And so that's all depleting our energy and our ability to focus. So a me break is a half day. I take it midweek, and so usually Tuesday or Wednesday, because otherwise it's going to run into the weekend and it won't get the same benefit. You take a half day so that if you need to get work done, you can still do it in the morning or afternoon. And you do whatever you like. Okay, you can watch Netflix for the day, you can go for a run, you can go to the cinema by yourself, which is a treat, by the way, if you've got children. And you can go for a meal, you can go for a walk, you can go to the library. Like, put into the chat if there's a thing that you'd love to do for a half day on a Wednesday, right? Just do whatever it is you want. But the idea of it is you give yourself an opportunity to fully recharge for a few hours and be able to return back to the demands of the day a little bit better. And look, research has shown that just like running a marathon, if you're coming up to a busy period of work, if there's a very important project kicking off, a very important cycle, maybe a certain time of the year, take the me break beforehand. Just like when you're running a marathon, you rest the day before, so you're better able to perform during the busy period. So it's much better as a preventative measure rather than a reactive measure. And then finally, we have our mega break, which is your 1 to 2 weeks holidays. I see so often, and I used to be guilty of this when I used to work in corporate, carrying over holiday days. But really, if we don't take them, you don't have the opportunity to fully disconnect from work and recharge. And it's funny, a little distance can give you a whole new perspective on your work problems. So we do really need to take that time break. So this is my favorite question to ask whenever I deliver these sessions. If anyone has any holidays coming up, if you're going anywhere nice, put them in the chat so you can inspire everybody else to book some time off. So pop them all the way in and let everyone know what the opportunities are, what the potentials are to take what I call the mega break. And when we look at these breaks, what you can see is there's a break for every situation. So, of course, I want you to take your main holidays throughout the year. I want you to take a couple of half days for yourself if you can. And I really, really want you to take your lunch break. But on those days where you're saying, Niamh, for whatever reason, it's just not happening, you can always take 5 minutes. Absolutely. You can take 5 minutes a few times during the day. So make that your minimum standard for yourself. And, on the worst day, that's going to make it a little bit better. All right. Now, the second thing I wanted to look at, and remember this is long-term strategies now, okay, is to break the cycle of responsiveness. And I know the text is a little bit small on this slide, but don't worry, I'm going to talk you through it. So this is really taking a look at, again, the role that technology is playing in our focus, in our attention, and what we can do to improve that for ourselves, but also for the people that we work with. So basically, the way that technology gets adopted is, it starts at the top there where we increase the use of communication technology at work. And what I mean by that is, everyone is told to use Teams for a certain kind of conversation, or everyone is told to use Slack for a certain kind of update. And so even if you haven't been using it before, you start using it more and more and more. And maybe now with AI and stuff, they've got these cool features. Maybe they record your meeting for you and all those things. And you're thinking, oh, I should use it more and more. So what happens is you start communicating there more frequently. And then other people become used to you being available on that channel and replying straight away. So if I send you an email, if you always reply to me straight away, I'll assume you're quick at replying. Okay. So then I'm going to email you more often because I'm like, oh, you're really fast coming back to me. He always comes back to me. She always replies straight away. Okay, so I'm going to email you more. I'm going to message you more. I'm going to ask for more Teams meetings. Then you get worried about missing my email. So you constantly check your email just in case. And because you're on it, you're going to send another email. So let's recap on that. What happens is you email and you reply faster to people. Okay, people get used to you replying faster to them. So then they email you more often, or they message you more often, or they call you more often. And then you get worried about missing those. So you check your email or your Teams or your whatever more often. And so what we do is we communicate faster and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster until we feel like the only thing we're doing during the day is communicating. Give me a thumbs up if this resonates with anyone. So what you can do to manage it is to slow down. If you are an immediate responder to email, to Teams, to all those things, give yourself 5 minutes, a 5-minute window from when you normally would reply to when you do reply. And look, this ties in with communication and how your communication will improve if you give yourself the space. But what you'll do is you'll slightly lower that expectation on speed of response. You'll give yourself a little bit of space, and you'll give the other person a little bit of space, and you'll slightly slow down the cycle. Because who here has ever sent an email to somebody thinking, and then you think to yourself, that's great, now I sent that off and I don't have to worry about it until they come back to me. You start working on something else and they reply back to you straight away, and you're pulled back into that task. Right? So we don't always want or need the immediate response either. So slow it down a little bit, and that will give you more space for focus. You'll be less likely to be distracted, and you're interrupting other people less as well when you reply a little bit less frequently. So maybe one thing you'll do after today is over the next couple of months, slow that down gently, see what's fit for your role, for your department, for your line of work, and just make sure that it's not hyper responsiveness just out of habit. Now, moving on from that, one thing you can do as well is embrace an hour of power. So trying to, not be hyper responsive and not checking our notifications all the time, maybe putting the phone away. You can decide to spend 1 hour on the work that's most important. Now, again, I know there's a lot of people here and you've got different types of roles. So if you're in a very responsive role, this one is less relevant to you. But if you're in a role where you have planned work that you have to schedule and complete yourself, this one is for you. Way back before the pandemic, studies were done and have found that people spent on average about 3 hours a day of focused work. The rest of that time, way back, was spent on meetings and email and admin and all the bits and pieces. And I find that very inspiring, because what it's telling me is we don't have to spend all day doing deep work in order to get things done. I mean, businesses have been growing and evolving and succeeding for decades, okay? And they never needed 8 hours of heavy, intense focus. But what we do need is some time of focus. So perhaps what you'll do is you will pick 2 or 3 hours, even during the week, maybe on a Tuesday, maybe a Wednesday, maybe a Friday, and you put in 1 hour on each of those days, and you decide in advance what you're going to do. And then for that hour, you put your notifications on mute and you practice breaking through that flow cycle I showed you, and you do your best to do your most important work. Imagine what it would look like if for just 3 hours a week, you dedicated yourself to doing the work that you've been avoiding, that you've been putting off, or that needs a little bit more of your focus. Like, that would make a huge, huge difference. Now, the only thing that could get in the way of this hour of power is an interruption. I mentioned this when I first told you the difference between distractions and interruptions, but I want to come back to it again. Interruptions, of course, they fragment your focus, they break up the workday. There's probably some people here, give me a thumbs up if you're in a very responsive role, which means your job is nearly to be interrupted. If you're in customer service, if you're working on a reception somewhere, if you're in an operational role, those kind of roles, they're responsive. So like interruptions are part of the day job, okay? Whereas other people, as I said, they're in more proactive roles. But what's interesting is when we do interrupt people, it's usually to ask for help. You need them, or you don't think they're busy, so you just want to get an update on something, or maybe you want to share some news, or maybe you need a break. All right. So if we want to become more focused as a team and as a department, as an organization, we have to maybe be more considerate of other people and maybe pausing before we interrupt them. Allowing ourselves to continue on a task for an extra minute and allowing them to continue on their task for an extra minute. And what's interesting about this, right, is we are more susceptible to being interrupted by ourselves after we're interrupted by other people. So what I mean by this is if you have a morning and you're interrupted an awful lot in the morning, let's say from 9 to 10, you're more likely to interrupt yourself for the rest of the day because you've kind of got into the rhythm of being interrupted. Okay? But that only works if other people interrupt you. So if you start the day with an hour of 9 to 10 and you're not interrupted at all, you're less likely to be highly distracted, highly interruptible during the day. So other people do play a key role, not only when they're doing the interruption, but also on the knock-on effect for the rest of the day. Now, no one here works in isolation, right? Even if you're the only person in your department, you still rely on other people. And that gives you a phenomenal opportunity to create a better workday for other people. So knowing this, if you decide that you're going to interrupt people less, even for the first hour of the morning, I'm telling you, you are helping them focus more. You are increasing their ability to work without distraction or interruption more frequently during the day. And isn't that brilliant? To be able to do that for each other, but also maybe what you'll do after today is communicate this to other people and let people know, look, please, unless it's really important, please don't interrupt me or please don't message me before even 9:30, 30 minutes. Because it make a really big difference in my day, especially maybe this week because I'm going through a very busy period or something like that. Now, when it comes to long-term and medium long-term change, it's not easy, it's not straightforward. You will adopt some of these ideas and then you'll abandon them all and then you'll try and do it again. And we'll go back and forth. And there's a whole cycle of change. I mean, we go through change in every area of our lives and you and I both know it's never straightforward. So I find that taking the time and the permission to reflect and adapt is key when it comes to improving any way that we work, especially when it comes to how we pay attention to things. And so studies were done that if people took the last 15 minutes of their day to reflect instead of to work, they were more focused the next day, they made better decisions, and they were more productive. It's because they simply gave themselves the space to take a look at what they could do differently, to make better decisions. And that improvement was sustained over time, by the way, so it wasn't just a short-term bump. And so if this is something you're serious about, if you join today because you really do want to get more control over your attention, you do want to do what you can do to work in a more focused way, perhaps, 2 or 3 times a week, you'll take the last 10, 15 minutes of your workday to ask yourself these questions. These are based on agile methodologies. They're done at the end of an agile sprint, and I just love them because they're so practical. So you'd ask yourself, what went well in terms of my attention, my focus, my priority work? What didn't go well or what didn't go as expected? And crucially, what can I do differently? Because there's always something you can do. It might not always be big. Okay, it might not always be a huge impact, but there's always something. Maybe it's you saying, I'm going to schedule that lunch break for tomorrow, or maybe it's you saying, I'm going to ask myself, what should I pay attention to tomorrow morning? Like small changes. And finally, if we want to be more focused at work, we have to be able to leave work. Okay? If you never leave, you will never get the space to recover, to enjoy other areas of your life, to get that distance, to get that fresh perspective. You absolutely have to leave work in order to come back. And in today's world, that's a lot more difficult than we like to think. okay? Because some people here can be constantly connected to work. And even if you're not connected by a device, you're connected in your brain. Okay, you're thinking about it 24/7. So even when you're not at the laptop, your mind is still at work. Okay, and I bet you there's at least one or two people here that have that situation. And so I have a mix of boundaries. I call it my boundary mix that you can pull from, and you can do the things that are most relevant to you and most important to you to help you disconnect from work so then you can return with focus. And so the first is device. So I do recommend, not having work on your personal device at the weekends and when you're on holidays, especially when you're on holidays. Like if you're enjoying, Spain or the golf course or the Greek islands, as I'm seeing over there, there's very little you can do about work. Okay. So definitely, taking it off at certain times is very important. Then the second thing is time. And what I mean by that is if you're entering a busy period and you know you're going to be working extra hours, be honest with yourself about that in advance. So sit down on Monday morning and say, well, it's likely I'm going to be working late on Tuesday. I'm probably going to have to work through lunch on a Wednesday and Thursday. I don't know what time I'm going to finish Thursday evening. I know that's not nice. I know that's not what you want. But if that's your reality, then writing it down and owning it means two things. First of all, it means you can put your self-care around that. So it might mean, you bring your lunch with you, or you get your shopping delivered at home, or, you just do things differently when you know you're going to be under that pressure, right? And the other thing that you can do is you can then be more aware if you're continuing to work beyond those upper limits. So if I say I could be working till 7 o'clock on Tuesday and I'm still working at 7:30, I can absolutely say, what am I still doing here? I knew I'd be late. Why am I still here? And again, we catch ourselves from just continuing working just for the sake of it. So that's time. Location is the third one. I say this to everybody I meet. I don't care if you're a graduate or the CEO. I don't care what company you work for. I don't care how important your job is. There's absolutely no need for you to check your email on the toilet. And there are also a few other places that work shouldn't go. There might be a place in your house that you decide that you're not going to work. There might be a place in the office you decide you're not going to talk about work, maybe the canteen or some area. Just try and establish some boundaries around parts of your home and your life where you don't work. And the third is situation, because sometimes we can talk about our job, especially if we like it, or, if it's challenging, and we can talk about it 24/7, and that impacts us. So, a great little idea is to decide 3 situations where you won't talk about work for longer than 5 minutes. So that allows you to give people an update, but you're not going to talk about it all evening. So for example, with my mother, with my friends, and with my family, they're my situations. I just don't talk about work for long, and it allows me to be present with them. And when we do this, it allows us to step back from work and just to recharge and to enjoy the other things, or to deal with the other things that are going on. All right. So that's it for the main presentation. I am going to stop the recording now, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So just give me one moment, and thank you for watching.